now.
Okay. Hello together and welcome back to my channel. I'm here again with Christoffer Døhlen from Norway, and we are today going to talk about the transgender question. And this is a quite recent phenomenon. It has come up in first, I think, in the US and in Canada, and now it also starts to come up here in Europe. And we decided that it would be a good idea to talk about this topic and to see what philosophy or different strands of philosophy have to say about this issue. So yes, maybe just an example. So the university that I'm in at the moment, they are very keen to demonstrate how open and tolerant they are towards people expressing different or alternative genders. And also, as I was applying for a job half a year ago, big companies like the UBS, like the big Bank of Switzerland, they are now, when you sign in an application, you can choose male, female, or diverse, or other, or stuff like that, and you actually have to click on something. And so I think it really is a topic that starts to come up in Europe as well. And so maybe just let the audience know what your initial thoughts are on this question.
Yes, thank you very much, Amos. So, as you said, this issue about transgender and reconsidering what gender is seems to be an important and at least relevant issue to today. I know there were recently a philosopher YouTuber named Oliver Thorne who runs a channel named Philosophy Tube, very popular on YouTube, I think. And he recently is sort of transgendered into a woman, which he did very recently. So that's an example of someone popular who did this. So it seems like it's becoming a relevant issue. And I think much of the topic boils down to the understanding of identity, because you hear a lot about gender identity, gender expression, and so forth. So I suppose the real philosophical issue, how this relates to philosophy, is how are we to understand identity? What gives a specific person their true identity to tell them what or who they actually are? And according to many, you could say, supporters of the transgender belief or philosophy, is that your identity is something that you personally feel and then express based on what you feel and think inside your mental realm, you could sort of say. But in my view, this would be a sort of a radical and problematic philosophical notion. To say that identity is based on how you feel and what you think. Rather, if we go to the more, you could say, traditional or common sense view, at least that was common sense back in the day, your identity was based upon your inherent essence as a human being. And your essence was based upon, as for instance, traditional Christian philosophy would say, a composite of body and soul. So you have sort of a mental realm, a psychological realm, which is part of your identity, but your body is also a part of your identity. Your body is a part of who you are. It's intrinsic to your very basic identity, which you cannot really get rid of. So I think that is very important when it comes to the whole transgender issue, because many people who support the transgender belief think that people who oppose this thing are hateful, that they hate transgender people, and that they are perhaps have some phobia toward transphobia. That's the name, transphobia. Some people think to use that label against people who oppose their view of identity. But really, we have to distinguish between treating a person in a good manner. I don't think many of the people who oppose transgender ideas, like myself, we wouldn't say that we hate them or we want bad things to happen to them. Of course not. We should be compassionate and we should help them as good as we can. But the issue is, what is the right way to help them? What is the right solution to the psychological struggle that they are currently in? And that's where it boils down to identity. What is identity? To properly understand how we're going to deal with it.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this was a very good start, and I absolutely agree with you that I don't think it is appropriate at all to be hateful against any person for some just personal facts of this person. It's, to me, hate is at the most appropriate if someone, I don't know, murdered your entire family or something, then we might talk about it. But so I think it's absolutely important to point out that, as you said, people who oppose the idea of this transgender movement or the philosophy that stands behind it or beneath it, they are not hateful against individuals, against persons, but they oppose an idea. And I think this, while we shouldn't reject people, we should be free to discuss and reject ideas. This is a very important distinction that we should stress here in the beginning. Also, let's just say it, for me, I think I'm quite an Aristotelian in this sense, that I believe that there are things or objects that have a substance and they have a form, and the form is actually you cannot separate these two things. And so, for example, if I look at myself, then I think you could say one of my essential characteristics is that I am a human being, but then this human being has to take a certain form. So, for example, I have a certain height, I have a certain hair color, and also I have a certain gender or sex, as you used to say, and that is male. And you can see this in every cell of my body, literally, because there is an X and a Y chromosome. And so there are deep bases in reality for certain facts. And if we neglect this, that there are material facts that have an influence on what something is or isn't, then for me this is highly problematic in philosophical terms, because then there is no basis upon which we could both converge on the same basis and argue on that basis. And so then basically anybody could just say anything. So yeah, maybe, what do you think of this?
Yes, I completely agree. I hold to the traditional Aristotelian view as you do, that things, when we look at things' identity or essence, it's about their, you could say, matter and form, as Aristotle would put it, that they have a material basis, what they are made of, and then the form, that which holds the matter together to make it that kind of thing that it is. And for human beings, it is the matter is sort of the body, and the form has traditionally been viewed as the soul. Not soul in the modern Cartesian sense, but in the traditional sense of being that which gives life to your body. And then, of course, your body, as you say, is intrinsic to your identity, because you aren't merely your soul and you aren't merely your body. You are both your body and your soul, and therefore you cannot get rid of either one. And since you were born with a certain biological and genetic body and features, that is therefore ingrained into your very identity. So when it comes to this idea of gender transition, these gender surgeries to make male people become female people and otherwise, they can sort of try to change the accidents or the the superficial features of human beings. They can change the hormones, they can change genitals and outward bodily features, but I don't think they can change your fundamental identity and your fundamental gender, which is intrinsic to you. So that's why the idea that you can sort of change from being a man to a woman through gender transitioning, I don't think it's really that which happens. I think your gender, if you're born a male, you will always stay a male, even though you might do some surgeries, as some people do. That will only change your outward superficial features and appearances, but it wouldn't change your substance, your inherent essence. So here we come back to the Aristotelian notion of difference between accidents, which are sort of outward appearances and features which can change, and then our inner or internal, I should say, substance or essence. So that's really an important concept as well. And yes, I think it's worth noticing that when you deny this traditional philosophy and go to this modern transgender belief that your identity is merely what you feel or what you think, that makes everything into a being in a constant state of flux and change. There is nothing stable. There is nothing that is fixed in reality. Everything can be one thing in one moment and then another thing in another moment. There is nothing stable. There is nothing fixed in reality that you can sort of point toward as a stable ground to understand and acquire knowledge about reality. If reality is reduced to what you personally think or feel or perceive, then reality itself becomes this unstable mixture of feelings and thoughts and this constant state of flux, and that has some very problematic philosophical implications, which can be really destructive. And I think this philosophy can actually be traced back to some of the most famous philosophers. For instance, Immanuel Kant, the famous German philosopher. He made this distinction between how reality actually is and how reality is perceived by yourself. So he made this distinction. And because of this, I think people today might say that, oh, we can't really know what is out there, so all that matters is our own perception of reality. And therefore, you could perhaps say that some of the implications of Kant's philosophy gets you to the modern transgender movement, instead of the old traditional or common sense view or natural law view, which is that no, reality is stable, it is fixed, it is intelligible, and reality is what it is. And things have an essence, and your essence is partly your body. So that's also important to note, I would think.
Yes. And I think this is really the key point for me, that reality is what it is, and it is there is material reality and it has a certain form. Different things have a certain form, and this is not, it's independent if you like it or not. This is just the way it is, and you have to take this as a start. And also what confuses me in this question is that people do this all the time in their lives. So if I go to the market and I want to buy a kilogram of apples, then we take certain material things, put them in a bag, put them on a scale, and measure if this is a kilogram. And I cannot then say, oh no, I feel this is only 100 grams, you should give me 10 times as much. The people will think I'm crazy. Or if I say, I will take this very expensive, what's it, I don't know, beef, and say, I feel like this is just an apple, so I should pay much less for it. No. Material reality is just, it's a reality, it's a fact. Or if I take an old car and I put a Mercedes logo on it on the front and the back, I cannot sell it for hundreds of thousands of dollars, because the material that this car is made of is just an old car. It's not a new Mercedes. And so you could go on endlessly like this. And so I think this, if you put this notion away, then, as you said, there is no more basis that we can't even talk anymore, really. And of course, what then would happen is that people would in the end resort to violence, because that's all that is left if you cannot talk. So I think this is the big philosophical problem here. Now, maybe I think it's worth pointing out something, that I think in some way that this transgender idea started is that there are certain cultural ideas of what it means to be a man or a woman. And these have sometimes been connected with the physical essence or form. And I think there is room for discussion in this area. So for example, I don't know, what's a traditional idea? The man goes out and works and the woman stays at home and looks after the kids and the household. Now, I think this is more of a social custom that had its value during the time where it was very widespread, but this, I would not say this directly follows out of the material essence of me having an X and Y chromosome and having a certain form and a woman having another form. You can also be a man and be at home, and you can also be a woman and go to work. This is not what I would include under this idea of essence or form. So I think there is a debate that one can have about these sorts of things, which classic traditional role models are actually come out of a necessity of reality, and which are just come out of a certain time or a certain view of the world, but could be changed. But to me, this has absolutely nothing to do with the statement that I can become a woman by doing surgery or doing different things or hormone therapy. These are two completely different questions. So I just wanted to stress this.
Yes, I agree. There is the distinction between certain social customs which are related to gender, but which could change. So, for instance, I think that the work of being a secretary is, in more modern senses, being viewed as something that a woman usually does. But if you go back in time, I think actually it was men who were secretaries in a period in the West. So certain of those stereotypes or customs have been changing. So that's an important thing to note. Now, I would think that you could say that many customs, though not all, but many customs are to some degree applications of more fundamental natural features and principles when it comes to men and women. So, for instance, you could therefore say that men, because they are men, have a tendency to be more masculine, while women are more feminine because of their female nature. And therefore, given that there are some differences in personality and tendencies and priorities and preferences, you will therefore see that they will act differently in their social life. And this explains, for instance, why certain males take different kinds of jobs than women in the workplace, and why they act differently and how they organize things and prioritize. So I would say that many customs can be understood as applications of natural tendencies of male and female, though some are merely conventional and could be changed without having any natural basis for it. So yes, and of course I completely agree that reality itself, when it comes to the fundamental basic aspects of things around us, such as things' essence, that the thing is what it is, regardless of what you think of it. Objective reality is very important, and it seems that there are many people in academia which denies the idea of objective reality and absolute truth, and try to come up with this idea that no, truth is relative or subjective or in a state of flux and in a state of constant evolving. And this is not only very destructive, but self-defeating, because if you say there are no absolute truths or there are no objective real facts of reality, then you are sort of contradicting yourself, because is that statement an objectively true fact? Is it true that there are no truths? So there is this self-contradicting nature as well. And of course, if we take this to the extreme, this idea that reality out there is not worth considering, reality, how it appears to me, is what matters. If you have this kind of thinking, then it is impossible to be crazy. And it's impossible to believe anything delusional whatsoever if you take this to the extreme. So you can say that you work at some place, and let's say you are completely lazy, you don't do any work there whatsoever, and your boss comes to you and says, well, what are you doing? I hired you to do a job, but you haven't done anything, you're just lazy. And he could say, well, to me it appears that I am doing a lot of good work, I am very productive. So who are you to tell me that I am wrong? Who are you to impose your view on reality about my work upon me? If you take that to the extreme, then you get this very crazy phenomena in reality, which are just absurd. So the idea that there are objective features of reality that we can understand and that we should understand as fixed and stable. Now, of course, there are aspects of reality which we cannot fully understand. That's true, but there are some aspects of reality which we do understand by observing with our senses and just thinking logically. And therefore, when we see that a human being has a body, and he has sort of soul, again in the Aristotelian sense, that he has this mental or psychological realm which gives it life to the body, etc. We as was understood traditionally, we see that, okay, then this person, when he was born a male, then he is a male all his life. If she is born a female, then she is female all her life, because the body is part of her identity, is part of her essence. So this philosophical notion of objective reality and objective essence, it's very important, and it seems like it's being ignored in debates about transgenderism and other issues. I have seen that there are discussions about, for instance, gender pronouns and how we're going to treat transgender people, or the use of toilets, how does that apply to this issue. But I don't know of many who have discussed the fundamental philosophical and relevant issue about, can you really change your gender? What is your identity? Which is really what is at stake. I have seen political debates about how to treat transgender people, but not really that much of a debate regarding fundamental philosophies. And that's a bit unfortunate, I would say.
Yes, I agree. And just a second. Yes, I think this is the first important point that you made, that even if we cannot know objective reality perfectly, it is still, there is an objective material reality, and our knowledge of it can be more or less accurate. But that doesn't mean that I can decide what it is just because nobody can know it perfectly. And of course, to me, this seems very strange in a sense, and I think it is in some sense, it's a luxury problem. It's a problem that only occurs to people who live in very, very big luxury. And I would invite anyone who does not believe that there is an absolute truth and a material reality that is objective to just stop eating and stop drinking and just try to believe that you are feeling fine. Because if there is no objective reality and you can make up your reality as you wish, then just stop eating and believe that you are not hungry. And you will see very quickly that this doesn't work very well. And so people who are on the edge of starving, they know perfectly well that there is an objective reality, which is either I get food or I will die. And the same can be said for many other things. If, I don't know, if you have a splinter of wood stuck under your fingernail, then it hurts. And you can say, oh, I just imagine it doesn't hurt, but it just hurts. There is no point around it. And so you can, if you are living in a very rich society, you can act as if there is no objective reality, and you can get away with it for a while until too many people start acting this way, and then reality strikes back, and there is just a famine or a war or some huge catastrophe, and then you realize that no, it's actually real and I cannot change it with my imagination. And so what I think is maybe some part of the philosophical problem also behind this is this idea that people confuse, in my sense, people confuse often oppression through other human beings or oppression through reality. So they say, I am oppressed because, for example, I don't have this or that opportunity, like material opportunity. So for example, I do not have the money to go to this place where I want to be or buy the house that I want to buy. So this is unfair and reality is oppressing me. Whereas in my sense of understanding the word, oppression is if one human being forcefully hinders another human being from doing something. It has nothing to do with the fact that, for example, I don't know, I cannot have everything that I want in my life. But I think this is here the incentive behind it is, if I feel like I wanted to be a woman or a man or both at the same time, then it is oppressive if I cannot have this. So what do you think of this?
Yes, I completely agree. I think that when you take this notion of oppression and says that reality itself is oppressive, then the term loses all its meaning, because then it doesn't really have any substance. There isn't anything concrete that oppresses you that can really be dealt with. When there are people who are using violence against you or violent threats, then there is some very concrete and objective and substantial factor which are really who are really oppressing you, and therefore it has a valid meaning. But if you just say reality itself is constraining my inner self, then you are just using a word to describe something which doesn't really have any substance, and thus become this meaningless term that can mean anything, and you can give it whatever meaning you want. So yes, I completely agree that that reality must be understood as something given. It is something in which you exist. It is not something that is in tension with you, because you are part of reality. So this idea of putting reality or external facts against your own self, again, this I think comes back to the Immanuel Kant philosophy, that there is this difference between how things appear to me and how things are in themselves. But I think this distinction is very flawed and problematic, because then you can almost see that there is this war between reality and how you view reality. And therefore this, as you said earlier, this might just create chaos and ultimately violence, because then you create this very weird basis for always rebelling, always rioting, always doing destruction and protesting against things which are really meaningless to protest against, but you just do it.
Yes, and I believe you mentioned this, that we have to see reality as a given, and I exist in reality, inside of it. And this reminded me of, there are certain philosophical current which is called idealism, where these people believe that it's the other way around, that reality exists inside of my consciousness. And I think maybe this is even the problem that we are seeing here. This is the clash between realism and idealism. And to me, again, this always seemed like just some kind of craziness. And as we both said now, yes, just try not eating and see if you will become hungry, and see if you can imagine, no, reality is different, I am not really hungry. So, and yeah, I think also this idea that reality is oppressing my true self, as you put it, this, to me, this seems like a phase of development that small children at the age of, I don't know, between 0 and 5 have to go through, that they learn that reality is like it is, and it is not always like I want it to be. And there is this phase where kids will be, but I want it to be like this, and they will become very angry at reality. And at some point you learn that if you are angry or not, it will just stay as it is, and then you learn that you have to live within reality. And so I think, I don't know, maybe this development doesn't happen for everyone, but I think this is very problematic. And of course, also, this also goes into the discussion of positive and negative rights. So that's exactly why many of the early Enlightenment philosophers around the Declaration of Independence of the United States, they were very much focused on defining rights in the negative terms. So for example, I have a right to life and liberty and other negative formulated rights, which means that other people should not or are not morally allowed to use violence to stop me from living or walking about or doing what I want with my own property or my own body. But this is very different from the notion of positive rights, which is, for example, many people today think every human being has a right to shelter and to clothes and to food and to medicine and to an education and to 10,000 other things. But these are all things that somebody else has to provide. They are not just, I don't know, like, as long as I'm alive, my being alive doesn't directly require anybody else to do anything. It's just a function of my own body. But if I want food, then food doesn't just fall from the sky, it has to be produced. And so somebody else now has to produce it. And this also goes to this other important point that you made, that if you start pursuing this idea that there is no objective reality or people have a right to whatever they desire or wish, then violence will be the end result, because your ideas will clash with desires of other people or just with shortage of material in reality. And then you can either accept this and let go of your theory and find a theory that has more to do with objective reality, or you can cling to it and try to make it a reality by using force, and then you end up using force against other human beings.
Yes, this reminds me of the French existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who also had these very weird notions that essences doesn't really exist, and thought that it's all about how you define yourself. So it's very much into this subjectivist notion of reality. And he asserted, I think, that human beings should always be in a constant struggle for liberating themselves from oppression. So he actually advocated for constant rebellion and constant protests, where he thought that no matter what kind of system you implement in society, it will necessarily become oppressive in some way or another. So he actually admitted that we should have just constant, unending, eternal, violent rebellion and struggle, because he always thought that whatever system is implemented, whether it's a woke, radical left-wing kind of socialist system, it will itself be oppressive. So I think all in his philosophy we see this extremely absurd dilemma and sort of despair, you could sort of call it. So I think that's an interesting idea that he had there. And yes, I think this idea that reality is not objective and it's all about how you perceive things I think this philosophy, you can sort of say that it could be traced back all the way to perhaps Willem of Ockham and his philosophy of nominalism, which is this idea that abstract concepts and essences, they don't really exist in themselves out there. They only exist inside my mind, or perhaps they don't exist at all. So when you, for instance, say the words tree or car or ground or justice, these are just words that reflect to your own mental ideas. They don't really reflect anything out there in a real sense. And that's the philosophy of nominalism, as I have understood it myself. Perhaps there are some, perhaps it's more complicated, but that's how I understand it. And from there, you get a lot of problematic implications. And then you have Immanuel Kant coming and saying, well, we can't really know a reality outside of our own mind, so it's all about how we conceive and how we perceive things, and that's also have very destructive implications. So it's something that we should get rid of, this this subjectivist, perceptionist view of reality. And then of course you have philosophers like Hegel, this German philosopher, who was an idealist, since you mentioned idealism. And he, I think, believed that reality is all about a mental realm, which always is in a state of change and flux. So things might be true in the past, but now this mental zeitgeist, I think is he called it in German, this spirit, mental spirit, is always evolving and changing. So which was true in the Middle Ages is not true today. That which was true in the Roman Empire is not true today, because the mental spirit, this zeitgeist, has changed and become something new. So so he also had this very strange notion of reality based on that. So he asserted, I think, that you could have two logically contradictory statements, and they be both true, because it's all dependent upon this mental spirit evolving and changing. So we see some very interesting and fascinating, but also of course false spin-offs of this subjectivist notion of reality. So I think a return to a more Aristotelian or natural law sense is important. And again, as we were discussing, this idea is just common sense, and it's something that all people abide by in their everyday lives, like when they drive home and go through the traffic, when they go to the store and are going to buy some things from a drugstore, for instance, that there's some medicine. They always look at what they're buying and seeing, okay, how many can I take this day without being poisoned or something. They're always looking at objective reality to tell them information about what they're going to do. And yes, you mentioned this this idea of the inner self, that inner self is sort of rebelling against reality, that you see this in children. And I think that's a very interesting observation. And therefore we need to, I would say, point out that no, the actual case is that yourself is something which exists, but it exists in reality, as we were saying. And it is something that can be formed and improved over time. And here we come into the discussion of virtue, how you as a human being can improve yourself and become virtuous. And this is, you could say, linked to the idea that there is a reality out there and you must conform to that in a good way. And therefore you need to be virtuous, you need to improve, you need to change things yourself. And from there you could sort of get the implication that you are responsible for your own life and your own actions. So yeah, the idea of personal responsibility is also very important to what you said about negative and positive rights. Because if you believe that you are responsible for your own life, that you have a responsibility of what you do, how you live, that you can actually improve things, and that you need to conform to reality, you therefore don't need all these absurd left-wing notions that no, the state has to give it to me and other people has to give it to me because my inner self is oppressed by reality. So that's also at the center when it comes to the idea of negative and positive rights, that personal responsibility, and that you have some sphere of your own that you need to take care of is very important. Instead you get this very socialist notion of no, the state has to give it to me because my inner self needs them, like small children in a sense. Now, I'm not saying that people are not entitled to anything positive whatsoever. You could, for instance, argue that people who are living in extreme poverty and are starving extremely, that, for instance, the local community has a moral obligation to help them out. That of course is something you could believe in, but to say that the state should have this huge welfare state to take care of your life is very problematic, and we need to emphasize personal responsibility instead of this modern left-wing notion.
Yes, very good. And as you were talking, it just reminded me of this notion of Carl Gustav Jung, that the individuation is basically the most important task that you have in your life, is to truly unfold yourself and become who you are in a sense. So, and to me, this has very much to do with finding your place in reality. And it's not, in some sense, just in my mind, I have some image of what I am and then forcing other people to behave as if this were the case or to make this happen. But it is, as we said, there is material reality and it has a certain form, but through your action, you can influence the form of material around you. And of course, you can influence the form of yourself. So for example, you can become a healthy and sportive person, or you can become an unhealthy and obese person. But you cannot become this by wishing it or by surgery or by anything else than by going through the process and actually working with material reality, and then you can actually influence and develop it and improve yourself and find your place in reality. And so I think to come back to the transgender question, I think there is a very real and maybe the most important thing in your life is to find out who you actually are, who you want to be, and then to work to make this a reality, to become this person. But this is not done through surgery, and it is not done through some laws or changing social customs. And also it is not without limits. So for example, my height is just 1.70 m, and I will not grow much taller than this. And so I will not become a 2-meter tall guy. And so that means my chance at becoming a professional basketball player are somewhat limited. Now, there are short people who become professional basketball players, but still you have to deal within the constraints of material reality. Yes.
Yes, and that touches upon another point, which is I think important, and that is that it seems like many people, for instance, teachers teach young children in school that they can be whatever they want to be. Just have an interest, just will it, and you will gain whatever you want to gain. You can be whatever you want to be. And I think this notion is very harmful, because when certain people have this idea that, oh, I can be whatever I want if I wish to, and they grow up with this mentality, and then they actually try to accomplish what they want to accomplish, and then they realize, no, I can't actually do it. I am not able to. I am too weak physically, or there is some other problem. Then they can be really disappointed, because they have been brought up in this mentality that, no, you can actually do whatever you want. Just wish it and it will come true. And perhaps some people will live in self-denial and begin to think, oh, I didn't actually do it because all those people oppressed me, they hated me. That's why I didn't really become this popular singer or this popular football player or painter or film director, because all these people hated me and they want to oppress me. And this, of course, has very dangerous implications. For instance, if this person who are believing this and not really achieving what they want to achieve, let's say he's a black person, he might be tempted to say, oh, because they are racist, that's why I didn't get what I wanted to get. Or if there is some woman perhaps she thinks, oh, that's because they are sexist, and therefore they find reasons to believe in their self-denial, that no, actually they can do whatever they want, but they are these evil capitalists or men or white people who are oppressing me. So I think also there we see a reflection of this very destructive philosophy and the need to conform to reality. Now, of course, there are, in a sense, and to certain degrees, the case that you could do many things if you work hard, but that is limited. You cannot be absolutely whatever they want. There are certain limits that you simply have to accept because, again, it's objective reality. So just to sort of get back to the fundamental issue when it comes to transgenderism, I would therefore say that when there are people who struggle psychologically and feel that they belong to another gender than that which they actually belong to, I think we therefore should treat them with compassion and help them, and we shouldn't hate them or shun them, but we should help them and care about them, and give them some sort of psychotherapy, or try to help them as best as possible. But the solution is not to tell them that they can be something that they are not. The solution is to try to help them as best as we can, to make them accept their true identity. Of course, there will be very many struggles and hardships and difficulties, but I think we should always have in mind that we want to help them, but we want to help them in a fruitful and productive and good way. So that's very important to emphasize that we do not hate, we do not shun, we should help and be compassionate, but we should do it in the moral and good way. So that's how I would say that.
Yes, I agree. And also it is important to note that to help someone means to help them in reality. You cannot help someone in a fantasy or dream world. You can only actually help someone to have a meaningful or satisfying or less painful life by helping them in reality. And so people have to find a way to live in reality that they can enjoy, or to some extent be satisfied with this way of living in reality. And yes, I think this is very important. And that's, I think, also maybe it makes sense to say to a small kid, you can become whatever you want. But then as you grow older, this statement has to be more refined. Like everything, you say it very simple for small children, and then as you grow up and you realize reality is more complicated, then also these statements have to become more nuanced. And so the nuance that has to be added is you can become anything that you want within the physical limits of your biological capability and also just of the world. And so I think this is very important to learn this, because as you said, if you don't, then you will end up blaming other people, because if I can become whatever I want, then other people are at fault that I didn't. And this goes back to what we touched already, that this will end up in violence, because then you say, if I could just eliminate these evil people, then I could become what I want. And so then you have a solution, for a perceived solution for this problem, and this will lead to violence. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And there seems to be many people who are unfortunately brought up in this mentality, and therefore the whole reality gets torn down when they say that that's not actually happening. For instance, I don't know if you have seen some auditions on Britain's Got Talent, this famous show, when there are people who are getting on stage and they are sort of getting to show how talented they are. For instance, people who are going to sing and they believe in themselves that they are going to be famous, great singers, they sing so beautifully. But when they actually do it, the judges realize, no, they were terrible. They don't have a future in singing. And when they actually tell them the truth, there have been some very dramatic reactions in some of these auditions. So I think that demonstrates to some degree the unfortunate situation some children are brought up in when they have this idea that I can be absolutely whatever I want without qualification, because qualification is is important, and yes, again, reality is important. So yes, we need to make people understand that reality is subjective, truth is subjective, and we can know things about reality which are fixed, sort of, that a thing is what it is. It cannot be something else if you wishes it to be. And your reality or your identity is at least partly based on your body, which is what it is, and you cannot change it. So when your mind or your feelings doesn't conform to what your body is or who you are, then it is your mental beliefs and your feelings that should change to conform to reality instead of the other way around. So people who struggle with gender dysphoria, I think is the technical term for people struggling in that scenario, we should help them understand that their beliefs are false. They don't conform to reality, but we, of course, we should do that in a gentle and compassionate way, but we should nevertheless emphasize that they need to conform to reality, and they should embrace the gender they were born with, because that's who they truly are, instead of trying to change their gender, which is really impossible.
Yes, and also I think in this same notion, I completely agree with what you said. With the helping comes also the realization that the world is very big and there are very different niches in society that you can occupy, and that these niches have also a special value. So a person who has a male body but is in many different psychological ways very feminine and very attracted maybe to femininity or to different patterns of behavior that we normally associate with women, he can maybe fill a very special niche in some career. He could be maybe a dress designer, or I don't know, a hairstylist, or there are hundreds of possibilities that he could maybe find a place in reality, in society, that he can actually be happy in this place, even though he accepts that he has the body of a man, that he is a man, but he is a special man. He is not like everybody else. That's why everybody is special in his own sense. And that's why everybody has to find his own place in reality. And I think that's exactly what Jung meant with the process of individuation. But you have to do it in reality. There is no way of getting around learning this. And the longer that you don't want to learn it, just the harder you will hit your head against this wall of reality, because reality is the way it is. It will not change no matter how much you want. So yes.
Yes, exactly. So when it comes to teaching children about what they can become, there might be a discussion about exactly what should you say. Should you say that they can be absolutely whatever they want in a qualified sense, or should you say that they can only be a very few things? That's a discussion about the balance there, perhaps for another time. But yes, generally speaking, people must be trained to confront and meet reality and be prepared to do so, instead of having this tension between their own self and reality, which is based on this false philosophy. And as you say, there might be, of course, some solutions to people who are a certain way, but perhaps they have a preference which doesn't really fit with the scenario that they are in. Perhaps there is some way to adapt to that. I don't know whether that what kind of solutions might be presented, but perhaps there are some solutions there as well, how to adapt your preferences, as you mentioned with your example. Perhaps there are some ways to do that in a good manner. So that's also we could perhaps explore more in a later video. Yes, I don't think I have anything more to add, really. I think we have touched on many important points about objective reality, about the need to make people understand that they must conform to reality and they must embrace their identity, which really is partly their body and the gender they were born with. So they cannot really change that. And therefore, if you're born a man, you will always be a man. And if you're born a woman, you will always be a woman. and also that there are only 2 genders. So as you also briefly mentioned, that the idea that we need to add more genders is also absurd, because that is also just based on your feeling, that you feel you are something in between male and female. No, really, they are just male people and female people, and that's very important for anyone to understand. So yeah.
Yes, I think I have nothing really to add. I think this is the main point, that the basis of everything is material reality, and you cannot get around it, and it will be not good if you try. So yes, I thank you very much for this conversation. I think it was interesting. I would be interested in what the viewers think of this topic. And yes, thank you for coming on the channel.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Great. So I will see you another time. Bye-bye.
Great. Goodbye.